Thanks, Damien. The last time I spoke in Australia was down in Longford, Victoria, and I was incredibly intimidated because it was right in the middle of the Ashes series, and like everyone in Australia was on cloud nine, and for once the Australian persona was just full of bubbling with confidence. And it's different today. You know, we've just come off a very exciting T20 World Cup, and for once it's a subdued population. So like I'm feeling like I can actually engage here without being intimidated. But we won't talk about cricket today. So my talk is going to be about global livestock challenges and opportunities. And Damien, if you can give me like a 10-minute and a 5-minute warning so I don't drag on at all. And this is really just going to be stuff I've observed traveling the world and what types of cattle and what types of preferences when it comes to management and nutrition have worked and which ones maybe aren't working. And a lot of it isn't peer-reviewed. It's not backed by too much data. A lot of it comes from self-evidence. And so for that reason, you can't hold any of these companies responsible for what I'm about to say. Okay? So anything I'm about to say is mine. It's not attached to Genetics Australia or Transover or any of those other companies. And this is the network that I work in, mainly focused with Transover Genetics doing the international business management. So what I want to start off with is that when I've always heard this meme that teachers are the real heroes. I don't know, have you guys heard that? Like, we've got to pay our teachers more because they're the real heroes. And it always confused me because my teachers didn't really have heroic characteristics. I remember in history class with Mr. Callahan writing with chalk on the chalkboard, not cutting such a heroic figure at all. You guys, I'm sorry if there are any teachers in the room, but that's my own experience. I just didn't have that experience with teachers. But I'm convinced that farmers and ranchers are the real heroes, and there's a reason for that. I think the first thing is obvious. Like 1.2% of us feed 100% of the population. That's a superpower. The next one, which I've noticed in countries that are flourishing, where the people are really, you know, there's well-being within the countries, is farmers and ranchers decentralize power. So the power is not all held in one major city, and they're flourishing little towns and villages across the country. And that only happens with strong farming communities where the family farms are still functioning. So it's not totally corporatized, it's not taken over by the state, it's family farms and ranches. That decentralization of power is so valuable to a flourishing country. And I've seen in countries where they do centralize power into one big city, the well-being of the people definitely goes down. The other thing they do is, from a national security standpoint, is in the vast tracts of land, and Australia is the best example of this, where there's nothing going on but farming and ranching, is they become the reason to have roads and to have cell phone signal, the reason to have electricity, and they become witnesses to the country in terms of what's actually going on there. If you think about it, without farmers and ranchers living on those properties, on that land, you could be invaded and not know it. And so that's another, I saw this in Finland when I was there 2 years ago. They've got this long border with Russia, and on the border there's nothing going on except for farming and ranching. And they're the last line of defense from becoming invaded. So we do this amazing thing of feeding the entire population, but there's a lot more to it as well. So if we can, I was going to give Ravi some instructions, but I can do it myself. So this is why it's so important that we preserve our way of life, raising livestock for animal protein. And it's essential that this gets preserved. But goodness, we've got to persevere. I don't think there's any industry that perseveres as much as farmers and ranchers have to, whether it's through fires, whether it's through floods, whether it's through economic downturns, questionable political decisions, droughts. We have to persevere through this. And then we need productive animals in order to do this, because productive animals, and this we'll get into what I mean by that and try and specify and put some terms to that in a little while. But those productive animals create profitable businesses. And the profitable businesses create prosperous communities, and that closes this human flourishing value chain. So we've got such an important role to play in society. So if you think back to your history lessons, where you had your heroic teachers teaching you, you would have learned something of Roman or Phoenician history, where there were these city-states, and the emperor or the king would sit in the middle of the city, and they'd have a big wall around them, and they would have gatekeepers to the north, south, east, and west, and those gatekeepers would monitor commerce flowing in and out, people coming in and out, goods and services coming in and out, and every 2 weeks or a month, whatever it was, they would then all report to the emperor and explain to the emperor what's going on from a 360-degree, what the world looks like outside of that city-state. And with farmers and ranchers, we can really apply this philosophy, because in a way, also like kings and emperors, farmers and ranchers don't need, they rule their kingdom. They don't need to listen to anyone except maybe their spouse and the banker. But other than that, they're in charge. And there are 8 hypothetical gates and needing gatekeepers around that premises of the farm that are really essential to keep that profit going, and really, really essential to allowing that farm to move forward as a commercial vehicle. Those are genetics, herd management, nutrition, animal health. Guys, there's a... Oh, sorry, I thought that was my voice feeding back, but... Oh, okay, no, sorry, that's no problem at all. I just never thought my voice sounded like that, and I was surprised. So nutrition, animal health, marketing, record keeping, and then forage management and human capital or human resources. Guys, all 8 of those divisions are equally important. And I know that we're going to talk mainly about genetics and focus on genetics today, but it's if you don't have all 8 of those gates covered, that's where your income can disappear through a gate that doesn't have a gatekeeper. That's what keeps this thing profitable. So none of us can do all 8 of those things really, really well, and that's where we reach out to specialists in the industry to help make sure that all those bases are covered. Then when it comes to the cattle themselves, and now we'll hone in on the actual, our passion and obsession in this room, which is genetics and herd management for the most part, is what I've observed and noticed in our own cattle operations and as I travel around the world, is that there are really 2 sets of traits. You've got your profit traits and then your turnover traits. Your profit traits are the ones that keep you in business. Those turnover traits are the ones you get paid for when you merchandise your livestock or genetics. Profit traits, the most important economic trait, and this is very different to what we got told at the World Angus Forum. So full respect to the speaker at the forum, but he told us that carcass quality was the #1 profit driver in the cattle industry. I'm respectfully disagreeing with him. I think that adaptability, so whether it's environmental adaptability or nutritional adaptability, has got to be the most important profit driving trait, because adaptability is a gateway trait which allows for fertility and allows for longevity through functional efficiency. If your animals aren't adapted nutritionally or environmentally, you don't pass begin. Like, they'll never express their genetic potential if they're not adapted. And then functional efficiency, we'll go into some of that a little bit later as well, is so important. Fertility, once you've got those out the way, that becomes the most important economic trait, because reproduction is essential. You know, any calf is better than no calf, and then longevity. We've got to keep going with cows that last a long time, because it's just so expensive to replace those females. So I didn't mention muscle or milk or marbling or growth or weight, and those are the shiny objects in the room, and they're so important, but they're actually meaningless if we don't first lay the foundation with those aforementioned traits. Now, functional efficiency to me is just balance. Okay, and balance is a word that gets thrown around willy-nilly. It's like equity or sustainability. We've got to ascribe meaning to that as well. Balance to me is several things. The first thing, it's physiological balance. So all the body parts fit together appropriately and in the right proportions. Then you've got the balance of the endocrine system, so endocrinological balance. The glands are all functioning correctly, releasing hormones at the right level, and that expresses itself in the animal's phenotype. Then we've got a balance between muscle, the product we produce, and fat, the energy it takes to produce that product. So in bulls, testosterone makes muscle, so we need bulls with some true muscle shape and tone, muscle mass, but then they need to have some fleshing ability to go with it. And then in females, estrogen makes fat, so we need full-bodied, easy-fleshing, soft females that have got fullness of body without having that definition of seam when it comes to their muscle pattern. And then hormonal balance. So essential. You know, I think I've got a slide on sexual dimorphism coming up, but a lot of our popular performance herds across the world, you go into those herds and you can't find the bull. The bull looks just like the cows, and the cows look a little bit like a bull as well. And what we need to do is get back to sexual dimorphism, where the bulls are masculine and rugged with muscle shape and tone, and got some, ascribe any adjective you want, some thump or some, they've got just some power, some grunt to them. And the females need to be feminine and refined and ladylike, with faces like princesses and bums like cooks. And that's sexual dimorphism. You know, if 3 men are sitting on a couch together, your shoulders are touching. 3 ladies are sitting together. Oh, Robbie, just you on it. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. 3 ladies are sitting together, your hips are touching. And this is a mammalian phenomena. It's essential that we stick to that if we're interested in fertility, which, like I said, once you get adaptability out the way, it's the most important economic trait. So as you can see, what I was talking about above, a female that looks a little bit masculine and a bull that looks a little bit feminine, sexual monomorphism. We've got to move away from that. These cattle at the bottom with sexual dimorphism, totally different phenotypes. And hormonal balance is a trait that is highly heritable, but it expresses itself differently in bulls and females. So a very masculine bull makes a very feminine female, and a very feminine cow makes masculine sons. Now, there's some guys here who've got blowers and clippers and hairspray and are very good at prettying their cattle up, and they'll tell you that a pretty bull will have feminine daughters. It's actually the opposite, because a pretty bull hasn't got hormonal balance, which means that his daughters won't have hormonal balance. Okay, so I'm going to take us back to where we were. Ravi, have you got me stuck there? Can we go back a little bit? Let's go further back, I think. Yeah, okay, one more. No, sorry, forward one more. Apologize, guys. So this is applicable to where we are now in Emerald, in Queensland, and this is a challenge to ourselves as genetics company and all other genetics companies. You know that 70% of the world's cattle are in the tropics and subtropics. But if I have to thumbsuck a guess, I'd say between 3 and 5% of the research and development that goes into genetics is done for tropical cattle. Like, it's all done for for temperate breeds. So this is an opportunity for genetics companies to go out there and do some serious research and development in making the tropically adapted cattle more functionally efficient, more fertile, and getting, well, a lot of them luckily have got longevity built into them. So what does it mean to be tropically adapted? If we go to the next slide, it's a lot of different things. So if you take, let's take on the American continents, your ruminants in North America, as you get closer into the Arctic, you've got your moose, and as you move south, you've got your white-tailed deer. So your body type is different with your temperate and your tropical cattle. Second thing is hide color, and guys, we've got to pay attention to this because you can do all kinds of mental and verbal gymnastics trying to get out of this. But the science is that some colors reflect infrared and ultraviolet better than others. And it depends what altitude you're at and what latitude you're at. But we have to pay attention to these colors, okay? Because there's a reason why cattle that come from different parts of the world are the color that they are. It's not random. A slick coat is very, very important up in the tropics. You know, a slick coat reflects ultraviolet and infrared extremely well, doesn't allow those external parasites to attach themselves very easily. And the next point we get to, well, I'll skip one and go to sebum excretion. You know, you've all worked Brahman cattle and Brahman cross cattle at some point, and there's a different smell in the yards and in the crush when you're working them, and that's that sebum excretion. And that is extremely important as well in tropical cattle because those glands release sebum, and it's a sunscreen, so it reflects light very, very well, and it's an insect repellent. So there's no silver bullet. Like, there are a lot of different traits we have to put together. These Bos indicus cattle also have these subcutaneous muscles under the skin where they can shake an insect off anywhere on the body without having to use their tail or their tongue. That's a big energy conserver. And then the amount of skin they've got. One thing I do like about the Australian way of breeding cattle is you guys have kept skin on most of your breeds, even as far south as Victoria. When you tighten an animal's skin too much, they lose their ability to dissipate heat, they lose their radiator, and they become far less able to be tropically adapted or to be heat tolerant, and heat stress creeps into those cattle a lot more. What Bos indicus cattle have is more sweat glands per square inch, so that's an advantage because sweating is how they dissipate heat, and that extra skin obviously just gives them more sweat glands as well. So that's what it means to be tropically adapted. Next slide there. I think my battery's flat, but if I can use your services, I'd appreciate it. Yeah. Okay, so fertility. We can phenotype for fertility. If measured correctly, fertility is highly heritable. So all our textbooks say it's lowly heritable because a lot of the herds that were used with gathering phenotypes were over-managed cattle herds. So if you throw feed in front of cattle, you can change their fertility pretty quickly. And I think it's very, very important in terms of profitability that we learn to phenotype cattle for fertility. And it's quite an easy sum. It is hormonal balance plus high inherent body condition equals fertility. So your feminine cows that are easy fleshing are fertile. Your masculine bulls that are full-bodied and have some doing ability to them are fertile. 1 + 1 = 2. If that's not convincing enough, then you'll see that your feminine cows have masculine sons and feminine daughters. So that's heritable. Your easy fleshing bulls and females have easy fleshing calves. So that's heritable. And then 1 + 1 = 2. So it has to be heritable. And it's a survival trait. If it wasn't, it has to be heritable because it's a survival trait. Now, the sheep guys, there are not too many sheep guys up here, which is extremely understandable. But a lot of them, when they buy rams from ewes that twin a lot, okay? and they've been doing this for decades. If it wasn't highly heritable, then that wouldn't be something to select for at all. So this is usually where I get my first black eye or blood nose in these seminars. But I'm a little bit seasick and jet lagged. So like if the slings and arrows come at me, I'm ready to fend them off. But anyway, this is my view, and why it's extremely important is I was at a big dairy in New South Wales a few years ago, and their nutritionist had just been there. Are there any nutrition companies in the room today, just so I know where to watch out? Okay. Very grateful for them, because they, when it comes to supplementing and they help the feedlot industry and the dairies and everything. But this dairy was struggling with its conception rates, and the nutritionist was telling them that fertility is lowly heritable, so I just have to keep changing your feed rations. Where the truth of the matter is, they've been selecting away from flesh in those dairy herds for so long that there's no way those cows can be fertile because they're gaunt. And when was the last time you saw a masculine Holstein bull? I mean, it's been a while since I saw a masculine Holstein bull. So this is the problem with us, and it's a challenge with human nature, is if you, we don't like playing Monopoly and starting at the start. We want to go straight to Pennsylvania Avenue and put some houses on the board. And I think, unfortunately, with live animals and ruminants, we've got to keep starting at the start. These are, at the end of the day, they might be fancy, and they might have come from Japan with long Japanese names, but they're still cows. We have to start off with them being cows. Can we go to the next slide there? Okay, we've done that one. Yeah, this is, for me, a lot of clients around the world ask the same question, like, what size should a cow be? And there's a million different answers. And the formula I've used with my clients is there is no set number. These numbers are just there to have numbers. The important thing is that you have some numbers and a framework to work in. But I think if you work through these steps, you'll end up with a cow that's the right size for your property. So firstly, don't spoil your cows and don't starve them. Just be responsible in the way you manage those cattle when it comes to supplementing licks and whether it's protein in the winter and phosphorus in the sun, whatever it is, just be responsible in doing it, because they're an asset, but you don't want to wreck them with overfeeding them. The next thing is getting them, and now we're getting into areas here where it sometimes can get difficult to calve early. So I'm not saying they need to calve at 2 or 3, but you need to decide when that is. Okay, so let's say you're calving at 3 years old, then you've got a cutoff that at 39 months these things all have to have calved for the first time. And then they need to do that every year. And then after that, they need to do that within a breeding season. So whether it's 42 days or 60 days or 90 days, you establish that breeding season. Then it's so important that we establish a cow-calf efficiency where your calves are somewhere between 45 to 55% of the mother's weight at 7 months old. And what that does, it stops your cows from getting too big. And then on the other hand, you establish a minimum acceptable weaning weight, and this is going to differ from town to town across the world. And that's your minimum acceptable weaning weight that you are happy to retain that calf or to send it to market. And that stops your cows from getting too small. Because too small can also be a problem, because again, you run into sheep and goat territory, and they can twin and they can lamb or kid 3 times in 2 years. So you don't want to compete with the sheep and goats, but you also don't want to compete with the elephants. And then if you do this every year, it says 4 to 5 years, but if you do this every year for 2 to 3 years or more, every cow on your property will be the right size. And it'll be amazing how that size is going to be very uniform within that system. Next slide there. So Kent and I were talking last night about how in North America, a lot of the EPD evaluations and indexes penalize body fat, back fat. Now, inherent body condition is so important in our industry at every single stage of the production cycle. And I think it's so, so important that we make sure that our cattle are high in terms of inherent body condition. Because you need fat in our system, and there are two ways to get it. You can breed it in, or you can feed it in. Now, if you're feeding it in, then if you're breeding an animal to feed it, you're also going to have to feed it to breed it. Does that make sense? It's a lot cheaper to breed body condition into cattle than to feed it into cattle. So why do we need it? Because we need it for conception. We need it for maintaining body condition through the winters. We need it for finishing, whether it's on grass or in feedlot situations, and we need it for grading when it comes to carcass quality. Now, these cattle that have high inherent body condition, they do a lot of other things right too. They're more fertile. They come into estrus at a younger age. The bulls are fertile at a younger age. They're non-selective grazers, so you can actually utilize your pastures a lot more efficiently. They've got better temperaments. Do you guys agree with that? They've got better temperaments. You know, last night at the bar, who was the best, most even-tempered guy? Not the accountant with a narrow face and the eyes close together. It's the big guy. He's happy, that guy. It's the same with cattle. The wide eyes and just a bit of inherent body condition, you know. And then when the steak hits the plate, it's a better eating experience. So those are the pros. Now, I understand from a feedlot standpoint and from a processing standpoint, of course they'll disagree because they want to be able to feed these things for a long time and, you know, add fat and do everything they do very, very well. But as primary producers, as farmers and as ranchers, I don't think it's our job to subsidize the next link in the chain. They take very good care of themselves. I think it's our job to make money for our families and keep that money in our communities. And those cattle do end up feeding fine. They might not shoot the lights out, but they'll end up feeding fine. And from a profitability standpoint, because fertility is so important, fat becomes incredibly important too. Can we get the next slide there? Okay. So Forbes magazine lists it lists all the countries in the world in terms of a happiness index from, I think there's 235 or 236 countries depending on, and territories, depending on who's counting. And what I found fascinating about this, the dairy guys will like this. Of the top 6 happiest countries in the world, 5 of those 6 are also in the top 6 for milk consumption, which is fascinating. I don't know if that's just the biggest coincidence ever, or if drinking milk makes you happy. I don't know how that works, but that isn't my point. My point is there are 3 traits that I've found with these countries that we can actually apply to our breed associations and to our businesses that I think are very, very significant. The first thing, all 10 of those countries are free market economies. Okay, so the citizens decide the value of a good and a service. Now, in our breed societies and in our businesses, I think it's so important that we free up our members and free up the people within our business to explore. We allow them to become scientists and let the farms and ranches be laboratories where they can where they can test genetics and they can test management systems and test nutrition. And we will all win out of that because they will prove and disprove things, and what they prove we can all make use of. When you restrict your members or you restrict people within your business too much, I think it's a choke, you know, and it's very hard for them to be creative, or it's hard for you to get novel things out of them. The second thing is those countries have liberated energy. So whether it's oil and gas or solar or nuclear or hydro or whatever it is, they've liberated. They don't hold back on energy. They allow it to flow. Same thing with our businesses. If there's energy and passion and obsession within your business, within your society, yeah, for sure, channel it, but don't hold it back. then those 10 countries have also all liberated women. So boys and girls have the same opportunities to do whatever from a young age. Now, Australia is a shining light when it comes to that, because, you know, especially in the cattle industry, there are a lot of leaders that are male and female. The problem with the countries that don't do that is, okay, it's morally wrong, but it's also economically stupid, because you're only utilizing 50% of your population, and that 50% that you're not utilizing is raising 100% of the next generation. So I think liberating women is incredibly, incredibly important as well. Next slide. So this is one that does anyone speak Swedish here? Okay. So I don't know how to pronounce this word, but I'm lagom maybe, okay? It's basically just the right amount of everything. And I've seen this in the Scandinavian countries, and I think we can apply this to our livestock and our farms as well, where they find an optimum. They're not interested in maximum. So they want the right size house for them to live in, the right amount of food on the plate. They want the right, the right kind of job and career. And if we apply this to our livestock, I think that's where profitability is. I honestly believe profitability is in finding optimum, avoiding the ditches on both sides of the road, and just finding that sweet spot in each of the traits. And then you get that balanced animal that you can actually make money with. So 5 minutes, okay. Guys, there are a lot of big opportunities around the world. There's a growing demand. There are less and less producers. Things have slightly changed since I did this slide. We're in a very rapidly changing world at the moment. But the demand for beef is going up rapidly around the world just because of upward mobility in the major centers around the world when it comes to population. Even once they've tasted red meat, even if they go down a level in terms of the economic status, they keep eating red meat. The populations are expanding. I think we're well set from a beef standpoint internationally in most places for most producers. We also have a good message. You know, we produce a product that is both sustainable and humane, and that's where we beat the pigs and the chickens, because the elite urban areas will say that they're not humanely raised, even though they're very sustainable. And then on the other hand, I mean, it'd be great if we could eat Norwegian salmon and, you know, white-tailed deer, but that's not sustainable. We're not going to feed up to 9 billion people that way. Ravi, let's run through and we'll find 2 slides to hit. No, we don't need that one. No. Yeah, I mean, this is relevant today. This stuff is so bad for our industry, guys. These wars and famines really bottleneck what we're trying to do in terms of feeding the world. And this was in Sudan. I didn't take these pictures, but I was there last year. And it's very similar to the Texans. They love their cattle and they love their weapons. But it's a different body type. I don't think the Texans must take their shirts off like that for these pictures. But I think the point I'm trying to make is anything to stop war is good for food production. Next slide. Yeah, let me close with this one because I think it might work into the next talks that we're going to hear. These are opportunities and challenges, guys. On the right, I don't have to say too much more. I think cattle shows are very important if they're done the right way and they remain industry relevant and appropriate. As you can see, that steer has no relevance in the industry at all. Maybe like at a poodle show in New York or something, but not in our industry. This next one, for me, is vital. So who's familiar with Dorian Garrick? Yeah. You guys are allowed to admit you've got Kiwi friends. Why? Just sit on your hands. Okay, anyway. So I've got a lot of respect for Dorian Garrick. Garrick is a Kiwi, did a lot of work in the US with the Angus Association. And what he did was a study from 1980 to 2017 where, using the indexes available at the time, this was focusing mainly on dollar beef, which was a terminal index. And he took into consideration inflation and labor costs and feed costs and everything over that time, and he found that the average Angus steer was made $144 more from 1980 to 2017. So it shows that this data worked. Okay, this data really, really worked, and it was a big win to anyone who was feeding cattle or processing cattle. During that same time, from 1980 to 2017, the average Angus cow cost $136 more per year to run. Okay, so if you were a cow-calf producer, you gave away $136 so that someone else could make $144. My maths isn't that sharp, but I know that's not a good deal. And I think that this is where, with all the indexes and all the tools available to us, we've got to contextualize it. And with the indexes, we've got to figure out who's getting that dollar. So if it's dollar beef or dollar complete or dollar profit, all the different dollar indexes, if that dollar is not coming to you yourself, maybe you need to reassess which index you want to use with that. So just before I close off here, we've got so many tools available to us, guys. We've got phenotypes, we've got pedigrees, we've got genotypes, genomics, we've got indexes, we've got EPDs and EBVs, in-herd indexes. And then from a breeding standpoint, we've got assisted reproductive technologies like IVF and AI, and we've got gene editing, we've got cloning, we've got all these different tools available to us. But maybe what we've done with all of that is we hyper-focused on all those different tools, and we forget about the actual product itself. So like this lectern here is an incredible invention. Keeps me safe, I'm standing behind it, I can keep the clicker on it, like I can lean on it. You know, it's a good-looking lectern. But you'll notice I didn't over-focus on the saw or the screws or whatever other tools they used to make this lectern. They're very good, and they're very useful, and they're necessary. But I think in our industry, maybe there's a little switch that needs to happen where we focus on the actual product, and if the product isn't functional, then we need to go and pay attention to the tools. But if the product is working, then the tools must have worked too. Does that make sense or not really? Thank you very much. Look, there's a lot more to say, but it's probably better that I stop. Okay. Appreciate it.
When you were talking about the difference on the profit on an Angus steer and the cost of the cow, is that due to functionality and high maintenance? Because the Angus cow herd size is growing dramatically?
Yeah, so what it did is dollar beef will naturally reward cattle that are leaner and later maturing, where a leaner and later maturing cow would become way less profitable, you know, or it would be a liability in a cow-calf operation. So what the guys were doing is really breeding for links in the chain that they didn't have agency over, and they were never going to get that dollar back. They were actually going to, it's a charity. When you start breeding cattle for the other links in the chain, you're actually doing charity work, which some people like. But I think that we need to take care of our families first. Yeah. Does that make sense? Or, yeah.
PJ, firstly, thank you very much for a great talk. Very interesting. Talking about the amount of fat on your cow herd that you put on, and I totally agree with that.
Mm.
Just wonder your thoughts on the measurement of feed efficiency. Just seems to me that muscle will be laid down more rapidly for fat, like less energy required to do that. And by measuring feed efficiency, unless we're very careful, we're going to get very high amount of muscular retardants and lose that because of it.
So George, Libba and I come from a country that was liberated in 1994. And what a tyrannical country does really well is they measure stuff. And they force you to measure stuff. So back in the 80s and early 90s in South Africa, there was big feed efficiency tests throughout all the breeds. And by the late 90s, they figured out that the most feed efficient and high gaining bulls, their daughters were the least productive. So exactly what you're doing. And I think that with feed efficiency, it's such a good tool, but it's a tool to be used in confinement, when you're feeding cattle in confinement. It doesn't translate well into forage-based systems. So again, like, there's so much nuance and context around every single one of these traits. And like, I don't know if you agree with that or not, what I'm saying there, but again, there's got to be an optimum somewhere where you can have bulls that have efficiency and have some gain, but will not go so extreme that their daughters eat you out of house and home.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Peter.
Yeah.